Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, whenever you're watching this last lecture of this class. I am Professor McQueen, and we have made it to quantitative analysis. And I'm super excited to go down this path. I did this for quite a long time as a market researcher. I focused on the qual, but I also did the quan on a regular basis when we would do huge survey sampling for organization, think tanks, groups, non-profit 501c3s. We would use this to do passion point studies, looking at their happiness, looking at their satisfaction, et cetera, et cetera. It's a huge part of our research. And as a former director of research and business development, this was part of my life. Point none, right? So let's get into this. Allow me to shrink myself here so you can read, and let's get going. So quantitative data analysis is largely what you learn in statistics, right? We are looking at numbers rather than the coding and analyzing rich, often lengthy data as we do in qualitative studies. Quantitative data analysis is defined as the numerical representation of observations for describing and explaining the phenomena that those observations reflect. We give numbers to the observations that are made so that we can find patterns and results about them. First, we need to code the data so that each of our variables have attributes that are coded numerically. Creating a code book house to house the locations of the variables and assign the codes to the attributes is necessary before we can collect or analyze, the data. This is the primary guide, the document that we will use for our analysis that we can locate the variables and interpret the code we have given each variable. Now let's say we conduct a study. Let's just say we conduct a survey on upper division university students that ask if in-person is currently a junior or a senior, right? That asks if the person is currently a junior or senior. My apologies. Participants that can then check the box, right? Junior, senior, while they're taking the survey. And let's say that we then also ask how much they agree with the statement. I feel prepared for my intended career. Crazy statement. And we give them options of strongly agree, agree, neither, disagree, strongly agree. Then they check the box that most closely represents their feeling. Well, we will want to develop a code book to house the data for each of these variables and all the variables in our survey, of course, that we can then select for our analysis. One way to do this would be to use SPSS, the statistical package that we often use for quantitative data analysis in the social sciences or other similar computer programs. Excel will work as well. I use SPSS nonstop in my career. You would then build your code. We'll come up with a variable name for each of the class standings. Choose no more than 8 characters and call it something that makes sense for you to know it by looking at that will differentiate from the other variables in your study. So we could call it class stand, right? CLASTAND. Then you will assign a numerical code for each of the attributes for the value labels, junior and senior. We could say junior is 1, senior is 2. Let's go a little forward here, right? This is the question we would ask them, right? What is your current standing? Are you prepared for your career, right? And then we're looking at how we build up this class stand, right? So now we need to code our Likert scale questions and feeling prepared for this career. Here's a variable name, feel prepared, feel, F-E-E-L, prep, P-R-E-P, right? Feel prep for feeling prepared or career, right? Depending on what the other items in your survey are. If we call it career, that's fine, as long as there are no other questions about their career path in general that we would or could be confused by when selecting our coded variables to run our statistical analysis. Then we assign the values for each attribute. 1 equals strongly, 2 equals disagree, 3 equals neither, 4 equals agree, and 5 equals strongly agree. So we're doing it from 1 is strongly disagree, 5 is strongly agree, right? We go from that variance, we'll go a different way. Sometimes you put it opposite. Once we get the data in the system, we can always reverse the code. We can always reverse code these ordinal variables for making sense of the data. Does it make sense for a high number, 4 or 5 out of 5, to indicate stronger agreement or potentially disagreement depending on what the question asked? So if we ask them to agree or disagree, I am feeling uncertain about my career path. Strongly disagree with that is actually more in line with the feelings of prepared. In any case, once we have built what all our variables are called and what their values are, we can now add the actual data from our participants, right? So we can add the data we're getting. We need to document what each participant selected. So then we go through each survey. Did they mark junior? Did they mark senior? Junior, insert a 1 on class stand for the participants. Agree, insert a 4 for field prep for the participant, right? And on and on and on. Luckily, data entry has become way easier with technology. If we have a survey that was administered online through a survey program, we can simply download the data and then go through and clean it for any errors or missing information. Now, remember that our participants are simply volunteers, so they don't have to answer every question. If we use paper surveys, say in a classroom, and hand it out to students who take specific time in class, then we may need to use a computer program that scans each document. Now, I had to do these both by hand as well as online cleaning at various levels of my career. It did not, as an account executive and as a director, it is part of the process, right? I did it as both an account executive and as a director as part of the process. Scantron tests, you may not remember them at all. You may still have already had some, right? With the requirement to use a number two pencil. Do you know what that is? And use the same method for splitting out the data from the bubbled in the answer choices. Once our data is in our system, we can now run a qualitative analysis. A univariate analysis is the simplest type of statistics, and we are simply looking at a single variable, uni equals 1. A little fun story from me to you. So when I was in my undergrad years, I had a professor who was awesome, right? And that professor was from my African American Studies class, AFAS, right? And he had a huge Scantron test. This was going in to talk about Scantron, doing it properly, and how technology has made it better, right? He forgot to scan the backside of the exam. So every one of us had to then look at the answer boards, and we were on our best behavior to make sure that if we answered incorrectly, we marked it as such. But 86% of the class got 100% on the exam, because if they got 50 on the front side, then they had an empty, uncalculated backside. So when you did it by hand without computer assistance, sometimes people had room to be able to manipulate the truth. Now, of course, I did not do that. I followed it to the T and made sure that I was honest, as we all should be, because ethics is important. But I did do very well on the backside, just because I obviously studied very well. So we can look at the frequency distributions, as we just talked about, percentages and averages, for instance. So how many of our participants are juniors and seniors? We could analyze the class. We could analyze the variable class stand, find out. Let's say we have 100 upper division students who completed our survey. It turns out that 45 are juniors and 55 are seniors, which gives us a frequency of the attribute. The frequency distribution is simply the description of the number of the times of attributes are observed. Since we have exactly 100, our percentages would also be 45% are juniors, 55% are seniors. Now, of course, the researcher does not have to do all the math for the analysis. The computer program will analyze the data in milliseconds compared to what we would have had to do by taking it by hand in the past, or when you forget to analyze an entire back sheet of a Scantron in an exam in AFAS class, right? The means today, we are able to generate a lot more data analysis than social scientists several decades ago. We did have to manually analyze their data sets. Who did have to manually analyze their data sets. We can also measure central tendency, the averages, and the dispersion of each variable, such as the range, which are still univariate measurements, right? Since we are just looking at one variable's attributes. When we look at the frequency distribution, almost everyone selected strongly agree, followed by agree, and then only a few people chose neither disagree or strongly disagree. The standard deviation measures how much validity there is within the data. A higher standard deviation, the higher the standard deviation means the attributes are more spread out, while the lower one means they are much more bunched together. So if the mean is 4.78 and the standard devi of the average and the standard deviation, the average of how far away the attributes from each other is only about a 0.5, that means that the data is very centralized. And we see from frequencies being so closely ranged is only one or two categories. We could also find central tendency measures, the median or the mode, which can both help to mitigate if any outliers are causing our average to be thrown off. The median is when the answers are all lined up and we find the middle number. The mode is when we find the most reoccurring attribute. If we were to do this by hand, we would literally write all of the participants' answers from the lowest to the highest reported number. Then we'd find the middle answer, which would be our median. For the mode, we'd find the most common answer, the one that is given the most. This becomes more useful as we are looking at continuous ratio variables such as income, dollars, or age. Now, let's say that we had people type in their exact age and we analyzed it as a continuous variable. Let me get to the slide here for you. Sorry, I'm talking a lot here. So we're looking at the samples, right? Class stand, we just talked about this. 45, 55, 45% juniors, 55% seniors, perfect, right? Things to measure, central tendencies, the average dispersion, how much distance there is around the central value. And now we're at the central tendency, mean, median, and mode, what we just went over. And then we're looking at the average age, so mean, median, mode again. So pulling back, we'll get an idea of this. The median is when all the answers are lined up, like we said, and we find the middle answer, which is the median. The mode is the one that is the most common to give, right? We would have to calculate these by hand and say we're taking it and we're saying where the age is a continuous variable. We're back, right? We have a range from 18 to 65, which tells us how dispersed the variable is. Let's say we get a mean of 48, yet the middle age, when all the answers are lined up in a row from the lowest to highest, the median age is 40, and the mode, that is the most commonly reported age in our study, is 41. Something is going on with our mean. We look at the frequency distribution and see that there are quite a few more participants in the range of the 60s than 18 or 19, which skews the median to older due to the outliers who are older. So it is beneficial to take advantage of each of these measures of central tendency that can tell us more about our observations. Our variables may also need to be collapsed to give more meaningful interpretation of the observations. Now, remember, when we are learning about creating operational definition, that we can always collapse into fewer categories, but we can't add new ones after we've collected data. So it's important that we do it the way we want to first, because we can always adjust with what we have, but you can't just create new data, right? We already asked the questions. We're going to have a second survey. You may not have the funding to do so. Big deal, right? So let the research question and purpose be your guide for grouping variables if necessary. So we can ask age as a ratio measure, where the respondents simply give us their ages in years old. Yet if it's more meaningful for our analysis, we can recode that variable into ones where we group specific ages together. Say we care more about analyzing young, middle age, and older people. We could group all the 18 to 29-year-olds as age young, all the 30 by 49 years as age mid, and all the 50 by 65-year-olds as age old for our study. Bivariate analysis is when we analyze two variables together. We can do this through tables that analyze both in a meaningful way. Let's say we hypothesize that seniors will feel more prepared for careers than juniors do, since they've taken as many of their finals, right? So we would take class stand and field prep, and we want to know how many juniors field prep for their career or not, versus how many seniors field prep or not. We'd construct a bivariate table by dividing the cases into grouping according to the independent variable and the class standing, right? Class stand. And then we'd list how many juniors chose agree, disagree, or neither, and how many seniors chose those categories. Then we'd read the table comparing the juniors' choices to the seniors' choices. As simple as that, right? So when we are doing this, here's the kind of coverage here again for your right collapsing variables, lots of categories, et cetera, Likert scales, useful new small frequencies, all the good stuff we've been talking about. What's your current age? This is what we're talking about with age young, age mid, age old. So we're getting the idea of these slides. Make sure you go through these decks, which you do have. Bivariate analysis, as I was just talking about, describes a case in terms of two variables simultaneously. And then we're back to where we are. So let's look at multivariate analysis. So again, let's say hypothetically that the juniors report these percentages. 70% of them said disagree, while 20 chose neither and 10% chose agree. Yet the seniors in our sample had almost reverse distributions where 12% said agree, 23% said neither, and 65% said agree. We can clearly see our hypothesis would be supported, as many seniors agreed with the statement versus disagreed compared to juniors. We could come up with a conclusion that the socialization process takes place in the last year where the seniors feel more confident about their career, and then the year before when we might want to dig further into what courses or other processes might be helping prepare those seniors in their final year. And multivariate analysis means that we are analyzing more than two variables at a time. We can use multivariate analysis to understand the relationship between variables in more detail, right? If we want to test, in fact, there is a significant relationship between class standing and feeling prepared. We could test a hypothesis that a student increases in class standing, their level of feeling prepared for their future careers also increases. We could also test to see if there are age differences as well. We would put all of those variables, class standing, age, and feeling prepared into our model and see if there are significant increases in feeling prepared when class standing or age increases. So essentially, you can start seeing and put all these things together. So as we wrap up this section, we must be sure we are holding firmly to our ethical responsibilities when using quantitative data analysis. It is essential that we carefully define our measures to stay objective. We do not manipulate any data to find the results that may not be valid, and reporting our findings as they are, even if we don't find what we set out to do. This is really big. I've said this in this class before, but I have worked with a lot of companies who have offered me a lot of money to make data say what it doesn't say. Data doesn't lie, people do. There is stories inside data. There is. There's such beauty in market research and statistical analysis, and I think a lot of people give it a hard time because it's hard work. But the reality is that we can take things like the census, take things like the different findings, Pew and YouGov, and all these places to be able to know what's going on in our world. And we have an obligation to report a formal hypothesis and informal expectations that didn't pan out. We need to tell the truth. If your story didn't work, that doesn't mean you change the ending. It means you report the story that you have, right? So as we're coming to a close here, let me say this to you, right? Time to prepare, finish your project and research, and get ready for the final test and submission. And as we wrap up in this section, we must hold firm to this. This concludes our video lectures for this course. I have loved covering these topics with you, and if I don't hear from you, good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, and good night. And it really has been my honor. Life is research, and research also makes life fun. And all things approach ethical foundations and focus on being trusted advisors and not car salesmen is something that I learned in my field. Is something I've lived by. Civility and conflict, you can disagree with people. You don't have to just only follow people who say yes. It's important that you learn from all situations. If you're on campus, always feel free to stop by and say hi or shoot me an email. Otherwise, cheers, ciao. And this is Professor McQueen signing out. It was great being your instructor. Have a wonderful, whatever this is. If you're in summer, if you're during the semester, thank you so much. Take care.